facings. So I'm going to plot the line for the facing. So you all know, because we did it last year with collars, that you have two pieces. You have a top collar and an under collar, and the same is going to be true of here. We also have the revere, and then the facing for the jacket will make the top side of the revere that's going to be on show. When that gets folded over, it's the facing that's going to be on show. So I'm just going to give myself a line that gives me the facing. I'm going to say from the centre front, I want you to give yourself about 6 centimetres. I'm going to drop a line down at that 6 centimetres. Yeah, that looks like a good line to me. And then I'm going to join it up here, just below, or just to the neck edge of that dart. And this last bit I'm going to do by hand, so I want that. Oh god, made a bit of a mess of that, but I want that to have a nice curve on it. So up here, along here, down here, out, and following that line, that's going to be your facing. But can you remember how when we did collars, that the top collar needed to be bigger than the under collar, and the same is true of a revere. So that folding back is going to take up a certain amount of space. So we need this revere to be bigger on the facing than it is on the outside of the garment, because that revere is going to be the bit that you see, and you want the seam that runs down the edge to sit under the, or out of sight, should we say. Okay, so I'm going to give myself on this an extra about 6 mil. An extra about 6 mil. Extra about 6 mil. Extra about 6 mil. But we don't need extra on this point. So we need a line that comes down from here and around and down and down and comes back in, whoops, when you hit the break point. So you've got this extra on the outside, which is going to be your facing, but the bit that shows. You could get fancy and reduce that edge, but I don't think we're going to worry about that. So that's what's happening on your revere for the facing. On the collar, if we say that this is the top collar, we want to reduce for the under collar, because we want the under collar to be smaller. Again, you've done this in your first year. Whoops. So I'm going to reduce that by 0.5 on that top edge. And you're going to be more careful with this in terms of measurement. And again, I'm coming back in to that point there, because we don't want to have a wrestling match trying to get those two together when we sew it up. That's that in terms of the line that we're going to make, the shape that we're going to make. But now, of course, we need to trace these off. Get some paper so you can see exactly what it is and do it. So look very carefully at the bits that I'm tracing off. So this is for the facing, okay? I'll weight that down with me. Sellotape. Okay, so hopefully you can see the line through underneath. You of course will do this more carefully, I imagine. So I'm coming down the line that I drew for the facing. And carrying on. Carrying on. I'm going across the shoulder. I'm coming down that line. It was the neckline that runs into the reverse. I'm going to give myself 2 balance points. I absolutely need to know where the notch is. And I'm also going to give myself another one there, which is the break line. So this is the facing, so I'm following the bigger of these 2 lines that run around the edge of the reverse. I'll give myself a notch at the break point. And then I made the curve, didn't I, at the front? Oops, that's a bit wibbly. Lovely, that's what I need to know about that. So this is the front facing. I think it's always useful on a pattern piece to know where your centre front is, especially with this jacket, because the centre front is where the grain is. So I'm going to mark that as the centre front and grain. This pattern piece, now some people will have you put a 0.5 around the edge and 1 here and 1 at the shoulder. As long as you know what distance you're sewing at, that doesn't really make a difference for this exercise. You would take your call on that from whatever your company that you're working for usually uses. So I'm popping a centimetre on all the way around. This will need trimming away slightly when you come to sew, or after you've sewn, should I say. Do myself a favour here as well. I put a waist notch on there. And remember that when you come to sew this up, you're going to be so grateful for those notches. They're not just notches, not just put there to irritate you. They have a really good job to do. In case you're wondering, you need that seam allowance on the this edge of your facing, because at some point in the not too distant future, i.e. in the next 3 weeks, you are going to be sewing a lining into this, so you need seam allowance to sew onto. Okay, so that's our facing pattern. So instructions, you are going to cut 2. Oh, sorry, you're not, are you? You're going to cut 1 pair. Annie, cut 1 pair fabric. You're also going to cut 1 pair with stay flex. So remember, stay flex is whatever your iron on interfacing is. Anything else I need to tell you about that? Well, we know it's a size 12. Blah blah. I'm going to do myself some balance marks on this side too. So centimetre all the way around, notches in position, grain line, instructions. I think we're good to go on that one. Now let's have a look at this collar. We are going to trace this collar off on a fold because we want it to be a whole pattern. Don't ever give me cut on the fold patterns. You know that that's one of my triggers for craziness. So this first one is the top collar. And again, this top collar will be sewn onto your facings. Notch. Oops, sorry, you're being more careful than me. Again, often people put 0.5. I'm going to stick a centimetre on. It will need trimming when you cut it. Sorry, once you've sewn it. I think what I've learned from making these films is sometimes I do say the most ridiculous things. I know what I mean, but of course, usually you can stop me, can't you, and ask me. But on a film, I have to keep an eye on myself. Okay. That curve on the back of the collar was created when we added that extra in for the leaf edge, and I think I might have said already, I do like a curvy collar. Collars don't have to have that curve on. Mine tend to. Okay, so with your collar, you need to mark this top collar. It's going to be cut 1 plus 1 stay flex, and the grain line is going to run with the centre back. Okay, and obviously you'll cut round it so that you end up with a whole pattern piece, not a half pattern piece. Another bit of paper to make the undercollar. Oh, big one. Just hoping. Yes, by the skin of my teeth. What I'm going to do on this is I'm going to reduce the width of this very slightly by 0.5. I'm going to draw another line on here that makes the collar, the under collar, a little bit tighter. It'll make sense to you in a minute, I think. I hope. So I'm tracing off with a slightly reduced measurement at the centre back, and I'm tracing off on that smaller line that we put in for the undercollar. Again, you will be being more careful than me with this tracing. I still want the notch in the same place. Are you thinking, but Annie, it will not fit? But it will, because we're going to do something a little bit different with it. So let's do go like so. We're going to have our centimetre seam allowance on it. Gosh, that was a really bad tracing I did. Please be more careful than me. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is the undercollar. It's cut 1. It's also +1 stay flex. It has its notch, or it should have a notch there. We know where the centre back is. What makes the difference with us being able to fit this, with it being slightly reduced on the back, is we're going to cut this one on the cross, cut it on the bias. So you're going to line up a 45-degree line with your centre back and that's going to be your grain line. And what that does is it's going to make that stretchy, so it'll fit into the space that the top collar fits into, but being on the bias, it'll roll more smoothly on the underneath, and it will also stretch tight on the underneath, and it just makes for a much lovelier fit of a collar. So that's your facings. I'm going to stop that now, and then we'll talk about making a pattern for the rest of the jacket.